Hello, everyone. This is T. Din from the Canadian Society for Epidemiology and Biostatistics. I have 12:01 currently on my clock. I'll just give it another minute or so, let everyone settle in. If there are any questions in regards to your audio, your visual, your technology, now is the time to do that by writing a question or comment in the questions box on the control panel. Please let me know if you have any difficulties hearing myself or Dr. Marco Ramus, who will be co-presenting the webinar today. All right, so let us start the webinar. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Everyone is on mute in order to limit background noise. If you have any questions or concerns, please raise your hand or type a question or comment in the questions box on the control panel. We are reserving questions in regards to the content for the end of the session. There will be about 10 to 15 minutes after the presentation to ask any questions. If you need to ask questions, again, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you so you can ask your question via your telephone or your microphone. If you want to write in your question, please do so, again, using the question box in the control panel. There is an evaluation at the end of the webinar, which you'll have an opportunity to complete at the close. If you do not get an opportunity to fill out the evaluation, you will be emailed the evaluation form to fill out electronically in about 1 day. I did send an email out earlier to all the registrants on this webinar. Unfortunately, the webinar system only allows for up to 100 participants, and we had well over 200 register for this webinar. As a result, we'll be recording the webinar, and it will be posted to our YouTube channel so that it will be accessible to the public and to anyone on this webinar and whoever had registered for the webinar but could not attend live. So do not worry if you have to leave early or you're unable to, and of course those of you who weren't able to participate live will be able to access the webinar within 48 hours. So just to give you a little bit of context to this webinar today, again, it's being co-presented by myself, T. Din. I'm the president of the CSEB. I'm also Associate Director of Health Economics at the Conference Board of Canada. And my co-presenter is Dr. Marco Ramus, who is the Vice President of the CSEB, and he's also Associate Professor at the School of Public Health and Health Systems at the University of Waterloo. So please bear with us as we transition between myself and Mark. We'll be sharing the presentation, but I'll be controlling the slides. So hopefully this will be a smooth transition for everyone. There's quite a bit of material in this presentation today. We'll try to get through it as efficiently as possible to allow time at the end. Please forgive us if we don't go through all the content and all the slides, but certainly you have at your disposal a copy of the slides, which is a handout of in the webinar. So hopefully you'll be able to see the downloadable handout. It's a PDF of the presentation slides on your control panel. If you don't see it, we can circulate it in an email post-webinar. So before we start with the main content, we'd like to get a sense of who you are. So what perspective you're taking as an audience member. So I'm just going to launch this poll and then give you maybe 30 seconds to respond. Now we're just at 90% of the vote. I'll give it a couple more seconds. Okay, so we're stuck here at 92%. I'm going to close the poll now. And I think, as we would suspect, between Mark and I, we figured we would get more graduate students and, of course, junior level or early career epidemiologists, biostatisticians. I see we do have a couple of mid-level and senior epidemiologists. So that's quite interesting for us, and it's good for us to know so that we can anticipate any of your questions and make sure that we tailor the presentation accordingly. Okay, so just a little bit about myself. I presented part of the content of this presentation a couple years ago at the CSEB University of Ottawa chapter, and oftentimes I get these questions when I talk about career progression. Students often, or people often, want to know how I got to where I am and sort of the trajectory from, going to school to getting a job. And so I think learning about people's experiences and the way they've navigated the system is helpful. I found it helpful when I was looking into what I was going to do as a career. So just to give you an idea of where I started, I did my bachelor's at McMaster in health sciences, did a master's in Epi at Queen's, did a PhD at Ottawa U, and then throughout sort of this education experience, also working either as I was studying or in my summers. So there wasn't really any wasted time, leveraging all those opportunities to gain experience, training, and also exposure to sort of what epidemiology is and what are the different content areas that I could gain experience, insight, and practical sort of practical experience as well. And as I noted before, I'm currently Associate Director of Health Economics at the Conference Board. So we're talking about health economics, which is sort of a spawn off of epidemiology. Not a lot of people go into health economics, but it's sort of, again, if you're looking at an area that you would like to go into, you want to make sure you foster that experience throughout your education and your work experience over a couple, several years. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, my experience. And then I'm going to actually unmute, Mark, you can unmute yourself, and you can talk about your experience. There you go.
Great, thanks, T, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this very important webinar. So a little bit about myself. I actually stumbled into epidemiology quite by accident. I, in fact, was doing a master's degree with a health economist, and he had recommended that I go into an epidemiology course. So I said, sure. And when I started my first ever epidemiology course as a master's student, when I sat in on that first class, I had no idea what the word epidemiology meant. So after the first class, I found out, but I started my journey into the world of epidemiology completely ignorant as to what it was about. A lot of people who don't know what epidemiology is think it relates to the skin, epidermis. I didn't even make that connection. Anyway, so I took that first class in epidemiology, and then through some other factors that I won't get into now, I wound up switching into epidemiology. I did my master's degree. I worked as a research assistant for part of that time. The person for whom I was working as a research assistant ultimately became my PhD supervisor. As I was doing my PhD, I did get a little bit of industry experience working for a CRO, a contract research organization in the pharma industry. Completed my PhD, did my postdoc at McMaster. My postdoc supervisor and my PhD supervisor were working together on a study, so that's how that connection was facilitated. I stayed at McMaster and became a faculty member after my postdoc was over. And during that time, I joined CSEB as a member of the board of directors. I was on the communications committee as the chair for a while, the membership committee, the executive committee. Now I'm vice president. And through my work with the CSEB, I also joined the board of directors of the International Joint Policy Committee of the Society of Epidemiology. And then I decided to come to the University of Waterloo. They were offering a tenure track position, and my position at McMaster was a non-tenured position. So I made the jump to Waterloo, and I've been here for a little over a year, and I'm happy. T?
Great, great. Thanks, Mark. So I just realized that I didn't share the poll results from the first question, so I'm going to do that now as I change slides. And I'll put you on mute again, Mark. All right, so we'll start off with just talking about broadly, we're assuming that many of you already know what epidemiology is. Maybe you don't have a great sense of what an epidemiologist is. And to be frank, we're not 100% sure what an epidemiologist is either. It's not a designated profession in terms of, well, we don't have actual regulatory standards for what an epidemiology is. But to give you a little bit of context, CSAB is working on a core competencies framework for epidemiology. So that's something that we're working towards to give us sort of more discipline around what an epidemiologist is. And I think at the end of the day, it'll hopefully give us some confidence in what we're saying when we say I'm an epidemiologist, for example. But if you were to refer to Dr. John Last, our dear friend, his Dictionary of Epidemiology, an epidemiologist is an investigator who studies the occurrence of disease or other health-related conditions or events in a defined population or populations. They may study disease in populations of animals and plants as well as among human populations. It's quite a broad definition, but what we know is that the profile of the epidemiologist today has changed significantly, and this is due to the fact that there are many areas of specialization and application. And for many of you who've already been in the work world, you've probably experienced that. You may come across an epidemiologist working in so many different areas, not only in terms of context, but what they're doing in their everyday job. And so not any one epidemiologist is the same. There are, however, some core competencies that would be framed by common knowledge, as well as a base and skill set. So it would vary depending on the setting and the field in which that person is practicing, in terms of research or an actual, a person who would apply that information and understanding. And some very typical areas or fields of epidemiology include public health, health services and policy research, health research methodology, biostatistics, etc. Because I don't want to go through sort of all the different fields of study and application, and certainly this list is not exhaustive, but it gives you sort of an idea of the breadth and depth of the areas or fields of study and application in epidemiology, and of course biostatistics as well. In terms of education and training, at the minimum, a person who's an epidemiologist would have at the least a master's degree in a program that would include, but it is not exclusive to, epidemiology, community health, biostatistics, health sciences, and public health. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, and as I'm sure many of you are in programs that might not have sort of these terms in the name of your program, doesn't mean that you aren't learning you're not learning skills and knowledge that wouldn't apply to someone who would be practicing as an epidemiologist at the end of the day. But you need to know what those core competencies are so that you are prepared to apply for those kinds of jobs that you want to do in the areas of epidemiology and biostatistics. I did mention that we don't have sort of a core set of competencies for epidemiology. We're working on that. It shows that the fact that we don't have a standardized basic core competencies in these fields of study, something that we've identified as being a gap area and challenge. And just to give you an idea of what competencies mean, we're talking about action-oriented statements that delineate the essential knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform a work, role, or responsibility. They also need to be describable and observable. So when you're looking at a job posting, those are things that should be identified quite clearly. What does this person need to have in terms of knowledge, skills, and ability? Prior to this presentation and the presentation I did a couple of years ago for CSB U of O, trying to get an idea of, how epidemiologists practice in sort of every in the workforce, and of course they vary by setting, but they also vary in terms of level, and of course with your level, there's a certain salary range that you could expect. And I don't want to claim that these numbers are correct, or even sort of the description of what entry versus tier 2 or tier 3 would be. And this is actually based out of information I got from the US, but the salaries should be aligned with what we're seeing today in Canada for an epidemiologist. So I don't want to go into this in great detail, but the level of an epidemiologist definitely pertains to not only your educational level, so how much education you've obtained. Again, at the minimum, you need to have a master's degree. If you have a PhD, that might, of course, change sort of what level of an epidemiologist you are. But it's also really about experience. How long have you been working as an actual epidemiologist, or applying the skills of someone who is an epidemiologist? So again, you may not have a job role that actually calls you an epidemiologist, but you're practicing as one. So oftentimes you'll see people who have the title of an analyst or a decision support researcher or something like that. You're applying your skills, therefore that is experience. And that would define what level of epidemiologist you are, and again, the salary range that you could expect. In terms of a biostatistician, it's quite similar to what an epidemiologist would expect also in terms of salary range. From what we understand as a biostatistician, from what we know anyways, a biostatistician would really be consulted on or used in a context of being able to perform more complex data analysis. Oftentimes they're working in a team. An epidemiologist is too. So it's very difficult to segregate who's an epidemiologist versus a biostatistician. But if we try to do that, I suppose the difference would be the level of ability and application of more complex statistical analyses. In addition to that, biostatisticians can have a master's degree or PhD in epidemiology, but oftentimes they would have a degree in statistics. We see that often, or in mathematics, etc. All right. So I'm going to pass this over now to Mark, who will be talking on the next few slides.
Okay, thanks, T. So T had mentioned earlier that sometimes it's hard to be sure what exactly an epidemiologist is, or even what a biostatistician might do, because there's a lot of crossover between the two. And I can speak more about the epidemiology component because that's where I fall. And epidemiologists do a lot of different things. Sometimes epidemiology is just a toolbox for how to do medical research. So clearly there's a wide scope of opportunities within the broad framework of epidemiology. And what you need to do as you're thinking about a potential career in epi is ask yourself, what type of career interests you? What do you want to do? Maybe you have no idea. Certainly that was my case when I was finishing my undergraduate degree. But you must have some interests in the area of science, in the area of epidemiology, at least vague interest. And once you can try to concretize those interests a little, look at the job postings and get an idea of the entrance requirements for certain jobs that you might like to occupy in the future. What is the minimum degree? Do these jobs require previous experience? How do you find job postings? Well, just Google Epidemiology Job Canada or Biostatistics Job Canada. That's how I ended up finding the job that I occupy now. A lot of these jobs are posted online, and the search engines will pick them up. And even if you're not looking for a job today, understanding what types of jobs are out there and what the requirements are will help you position yourself as you advance in your schooling so that you can acquire some of the skills that you need to occupy the job that you might want. It's important to note that not all jobs are advertised. Many jobs come from word of mouth. Unfortunately, many posted jobs are not competitive because the employer already has someone in mind, and the job is just being posted to keep the human resources people happy. Word of mouth is how I ended up doing my PhD. It's how I ended up getting a postdoc. So once you meet people, you want to get to know them, let them know your interests. T, you can switch the slide. You want to, yeah, great, thanks. Thanks, T. So once you get to know these people, you want to start to plant seeds in their minds. You can tell people that you're looking for work. Networking doesn't have to be running around giving people your business card. It could just be meeting the people around you and telling them, hey, I'm looking for work. I wound up, when I was a master's student, getting my first research assistant's job because I told someone I was looking for work, and that someone then called me back and said, hey, this professor is looking for a research assistant. So I applied for the job, got the job, and that person became my PhD supervisor. So sometimes just letting people know you're looking can create a network. If you are doing volunteer work for a professor or you're doing a co-op, do a good job. Employers remember good workers. And a lot of your potential success, be it getting into graduate school or getting a job after, is going to depend on references. And a lot of the references that you will get from an employer are not what is said on a piece of paper that the employer will send to your new employer on your behalf. A lot of the references happen in conversations over the telephone. They're informal. You learn a lot by tapping into people whom a prospective student or employee has worked for. So for example, when I applied for my job here at Waterloo, the dean of the faculty that was hiring me called my postdoc supervisor, who later became my academic mentor, and informally talked about me and asked questions about me to get a sense of who I was. So in those informal conversations, you get the real story on someone. So do a good job, because if there is an informal conversation, the fact that you did a good job is going to come shining on through. How do you get a job? Well, send tailored applications to prospective employers. So when you're ready to start looking for a job, and you might have to start looking for a job 6 months to a year before you graduate, because there are a great many competitors for jobs, and you might not get the first few jobs that you apply for, even if you get an interview. So start looking early and identify the jobs that really match to your skill set, and then tailor your application for those jobs. So if you're applying to a contract research organization that's looking for a data analyst with experience in big data, and you've just analyzed a big data set for your master's in biostats, apply for the job, but specifically point out in your cover letter what you just did for your master's and how that matches the requirements of this job to which you're applying. Generic job inquiries often don't work. Sending your CV unsolicited is probably going to have it thrown out or deleted. Sometimes faculty get emails from students asking if they're looking for, if they're willing to supervise a student or if they have any jobs available. But it's clear that the same email was sent out to every professor in the department, or sometimes every professor in Canada. I just got an email last week from a student who was asking if I was looking to take on master's students. And she got my name right, but she got my university wrong. And then a few minutes later, she sent me the same email with the university corrected. So generic messages like that are sure to get deleted. So don't just send a generic cover letter to an employer. If they're looking for skills that you have, write that cover letter such that you highlight the skills that that particular job is looking for. Same thing if you want to go study under a professor. If you approach a professor and you are asking if that professor is taking on students, please tailor your letter according to your skill set and the professor's research areas, and hopefully there's a match somewhere in there that you'd want to hire. You can change the slide. Ask yourself also whether you'd like to work in industry, government, or academia. I've worked in all three, and there are substantial differences between those three areas. So think about it. If you're lucky enough to be in a university with co-ops and you can orchestrate co-ops in these different areas, do it, because they are vastly different. Getting back to a point I made earlier about looking at the job ads early, these job advertisements can also help you understand where you need to develop your CV. If you're lacking work experience, try to get a co-op if that's not possible. Look for research assistantships if that's not possible. There are always volunteer work experiences with professors to try to get something that resembles a work experience. Sometimes some very competitive grad programs actually require you to, or not require you to, but if you have a publication, it puts you ahead of all the others. So maybe you want to, if you're an undergraduate student, go do an independent thesis project with a professor and try to publish the outcome of that independent study project. What about software? If you're in biostatistics, might you need to know a certain software package? So in academia, in the world of math and stats, R is a very popular software program. But in industry and government, nobody uses R. They primarily use SAS. So you want to identify whether you might have to develop an understanding of a certain software package to make your job candidacy more attractive. You can change the slide, team. What about taking courses? Sometimes we have people who apply to epidemiology departments who don't have a science background, and some of those people do get admitted because epidemiology is not chemistry, it's not physics, it's not test tubes. It's a science, a health science, that does impinge upon the social sciences as well. So if you're an undergraduate and you're potentially interested in this area, you should try and take some epidemiology or statistics courses if they're offered by your university. Not every university offers an undergraduate epidemiology course, but some do. So you want to start getting those courses on your transcript. Film and philosophy courses are quite useless if you want to get into epi or biostats. So the earlier in your undergrad career you start to identify your career interests, the earlier you can plan, and you can make sure to take some of the right courses. If somebody is applying to an epidemiology program from a non-traditional background, say they're from political science or, I don't know, sociology or anthropology, and we do get those applicants to epidemiology programs. The fact that you have taken epi and stats courses can certainly make your CV more attractive when you apply to graduate school. And having those courses, of course, will help you when you get into graduate school because you will have done them before and you might have a leg up on other people who haven't. What program should you take in graduate school? Well, if you want to get a job in epi or biostats, you're almost certainly going to need a master's degree. A Bachelor of Science isn't going to cut it these days. It might help you get a research assistant's position, but those tend to be temporary, and often they go alongside people who are doing a master's degree. If you want to work in academia as a professor, you will definitely need a PhD, but PhDs are not as essential for industry or government. Some of those industry or government jobs don't necessarily require that you have a PhD. So check the job advertisements. You can change the slide. When you're going into graduate school, looking ahead to getting a career, choose your graduate program well. If you want to go into public health, don't apply to an MSc in epidemiology. There is a difference in terms of the flavor of the graduate programs. Most master's programs in epidemiology are thesis-based and research-oriented. And most MPH programs are course-based. Some of them are entirely online. They have practicums and co-ops. And they're designed for people who wish to work in a public health department. If you want to work in a public health department and you apply to an MSc program in epidemiology, you might not be the right fit for that program, and vice versa. If you want to go and be a professor, but you apply to an MPH, you might not get in because your goals aren't aligned with the MPH program. So yes, if you have a master's in epi, you can go work in public health. If you have an MPH, you can go work in epi. You can go even do a PhD in epi and be a professor. Okay, so if you have a degree in one, you can work in the other area. But in terms of how the graduate programs are structured, there are two different tracks. And if you're not applying to the right program, you might get that rejection letter. Sorry, you don't fit the program. So it's very, very, very important to understand the flavor of the program to which you're applying. Tailor your letter of intent to the purpose of the program. So every graduate school requires you to write some sort of a candidate statement or letter of intent. You have to answer the questions that they want you to answer, but often those questions are just a minor component of your letter of intent. In that letter, you have to sell yourself to the graduate program, and it's immensely important to tailor your candidate statement to the purpose of the program to which you're applying. So for example, I used to be the chair of the Health Research Methodology MSc Programs Admissions Committee at McMaster, when I was at McMaster. So I've seen hundreds of candidate statements, some good, some really bad. The vast majority are average. And because the vast majority are average, a few simple tricks will allow you to propel your candidate statement into the above average, very good category. I always tell people that you have to explain to the admissions committee why you are applying to that program. So you have to understand the flavor of the program. So the Health Research Methodology program at McMaster is designed to train people who want to work in research. So when students ask me how to tailor a letter of intent to apply to that program, I tell them that you want to explain to the admissions committee why you're applying to the HRM program. So since it's a program to train researchers, you can say something in the very first sentence of your candidate statement. I am applying to the HRM program because I want to pursue a career as an independent researcher, and the master's degree is a means to help me achieve that career objective, period. And after I get my master's, I will go on and do a PhD. So you're telling the admissions committee right away why you're applying to this program, and you're showing that you have the right fit. If you're applying to a program like the HRM that wants to train people to do research, obviously the next thing in your letter is to highlight your previous research experience. What paid work did you do that relates to research? What co-ops did you do? What volunteer work did you do in a professor's research unit? And be specific about what you did. Data entry or analysis. Did you screen articles for a systematic review? We did a career day here at University of Waterloo a couple of weeks ago, and there was a guy who had done some survival analyses in the insurance industry. And he was wondering if that was relevant to get into biostatistics. And sure it is. Survival analysis in the insurance industry, the time to expiration of an insurance claim, or in finance, the time before a mutual fund is wound up. Those kind of analyses use the same methods as survival analysis in biostatistics. Time to death, time to rehospitalization. So it's important to highlight that experience in your letter to, in a sense, sell yourself. Hey, you know, I have an interest in research. I've done research before. I want to do research again and make this my career. And you bring forward all of that experience. Next slide, please. If you're coming from a non-traditional background, a non-science background, you want to highlight in your letter of intent the relevant epi and biostats courses that you've taken as an undergrad. Sometimes admissions committee members only scan your transcripts, so in the letter you want to highlight relevant courses that you've taken. If you're applying to a master's in biostats, in all likelihood you probably already have a math and stats background as an undergraduate. But maybe you took some health-related courses. Maybe you did take an epidemiology course or a critical appraisal course. So you want to highlight those courses in your cover letter because you don't want to come across as being just a unidimensional stats-only person. Biostatisticians do cross over into epidemiology. They have to understand things like study design and bias, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to show that you have some well-roundedness and that you haven't just memorized a bunch of formulas in undergrad. Next slide. You missed one, T? Yeah, that's the one. So avoid storytelling in your letter. Having read hundreds of these letters, I always roll my eyes when we read something, when a letter starts off like I have here. When I was 10 years old, my uncle's best friend's sister got sick, and I was touched by how the doctors used medical research to inform their clinical practice to treat the disease. And after that, I decided to become a researcher. So many, many letters start off with this kind of personal storytelling. And we, people on admissions committee, we just skim through all of that stuff really quickly, because you can put that in a letter to a master's program, you can put that in a letter to an application to med school, and if we start to think that you're applying to a master's program as a backup for some other program, it could hurt your chances of getting in. So don't put these kind of stories in your candidate statements. You're just going to lose the reader's attention very quickly. Come clean and explain big gaps in your CV or explain poor grades. If you got a couple of Ds, you might want to explain why, just to avoid a situation where the member of an admissions committee does look at your CV and flags those grades and then starts to wonder, okay, why did this person get Ds? So Explain that. If you had to take a year off school and you didn't work, tell us why. Maybe you were ill. You don't have to get into all the details, but you could say that you were on a sick leave, for example, just so we have a sense of what those gaps are all about. In your letter, though, don't make excuses or blame the whole world for your problems except yourself. That sends up red flags, and no admissions committee wants to admit someone whom they think might be difficult. Okay, T. People often ask me, how much do grades count? Well, it really depends. If you're applying to med school, grades tend to count for a lot. But when you're applying to an Epi or Biostats graduate program, many graduate programs will look at your overall file, not just your grades. I've seen many students with B+ or A- averages get into grad school, but experience is the key. Also, writing a good candidate statement is the key, but experience too. So get research experience before you apply to grad school. There are some research assistantships that you can get. Volunteer in a professor's research unit. Do co-ops if your university has the option. If you have none of those things, in your last year as an undergrad, do an honors thesis or an independent study to get some kind of research experience onto your CV. Next slide, please. Volunteering in a professor's research unit or working as an undergrad research assistant is not a bad idea. Many professors will try out undergraduate students and offer the good ones placement in their research unit as a master's student. Many departments, including the department that I'm a part of here at Waterloo, will admit students based on a potential supervisor's recommendation. Now, having a supervisor lined up is not essential if you want to go to grad school. Most students, in fact, don't. But if you do have a supervisor lined up, it really helps. How do you do that? Well, we talked about working for a supervisor and letting them try you out to see if you might be a good fit as one of their students in graduate school. But if you don't know any professors, pick professors that have interests that are shared with you. And again, send emails, tailored emails to individual professors with specific examples of how your interest and experience mesh with that professor's research program. Generic letters, I guarantee you, the same form letter that you send out to 50 professors will probably be deleted by most of them. Don't say something in your cover letter like you've read some of the professor's papers and you're interested in her or his work, because we know that you probably didn't read most of our papers. And we know that you're probably using the same line in the other emails. So avoid phrases like that that suggest it's all very generic. Please, if you email a professor for a research position, get their name right and get the university of that professor correct. Those are common mistakes. And in the letter you write, and this applies not just to letters to professors, but your personal statement, get your letter proofread. If you can't write a coherent cover letter, you're probably not going to get anywhere. Letters of reference. Most letters of reference that we see on admissions committees say good things about applicants, and therefore the vast majority of those letters don't make or break an application. It's only the really, really, really good letters of recommendation that can sway an admission decision in an applicant's favor. So get letters from professors whom you know well and with whom you've worked in the past. So it gets back to, trying to get a placement in someone's lab or doing an independent study. You're more likely to get a good letter from a professor that you've worked for, providing you've done a really great job. They can talk about your research abilities and your work habits, and that's what admissions committees really want to know. Or if you're applying to the job market, that's what potential employers want to know. Next slide. Uh, Avoid, if all possible, getting letters of reference from professors whom you know because they taught you a course. Those types of reference letters are of limited value because most professors can't get to know students very well in classroom settings. So they can't possibly write the kind of letter that can make a difference on a grad school application. And if the professor only knows you as one student in a class of 300, that amplifies the problem of the professor just not being able to write a really informative letter for you. To be honest with you, when professors get reference letter requests from students whom they only know as being one of many faces in a class, they tend to have generic reference letters, cut and paste letters. And admissions committees know this, so they give letters from instructors very limited value. I've seen reference letters where they were so cut and paste that the professor in the letter referred to a female student as he, or a male student as she, or they've gotten the first name of the student wrong at some point in the letter. Once, at the Health Research Methods Admissions Committee, 3 different students who applied to the program each had a letter from the same instructor, and their 3 letters were completely identical except the name of the student was changed. So what do? Well, we don't count those letters. We ask for 2 letters in that program, and so we throw out the form letter. We don't blame the applicant for it, but that means we can only look at 1 letter of reference for the applicant. And if another applicant has 2 great letters, well, that one is going to get the favor. So work experience with professors and good letters are important. And obviously, like I said before, if you work for someone, do your work well, because word of mouth goes a long way. T, next slide, please. So where can you go in academia after you've done your Masters of Epidemiology? Well, in academia, you can be, after you get your master's, you can be a research assistant or associate or a study or project coordinator. You'll typically be working for 1 or more professors on their research projects. This kind of work is very task-oriented. It's a lot of nitty-gritty work. There may be some management responsibility for senior coordinators who administer research budgets, maybe hire summer students and supervise some of the more junior research assistants. If you do an MPH and you want to go in academia, generally it's the same as doing an MSc, but you'll often be more linked to researchers who do public health oriented research or who have links with departments of public health. They work in academia, but they're linked to these departments. And so you might, with an MPH in academia, work more for one of those people. An MSc in Biostats, well, you'll be a data analyst. Again, you'll be working for 1 or more professors on their research projects. I should note that good analysts are in high demand, and even with a master's, you can get paid well if you're a data analyst in academia. But generally speaking, master's level positions in academia don't pay as well as similar positions in industry. So good analysts are in high demand, and in the academic pay scale for master's level people, you would command a good salary, but that salary would be even better if you were in industry. Sometimes in large research centers, such a person might oversee a group of junior analysts. Next slide. If you get your PhD in Epi or Biostats, you'll probably become, or hopefully become, a faculty member. So you'll be applying for grants to run your own research studies. You'll work as a co-investigator on other professors' studies. You'll be teaching and supervising students. You'll be performing service, sitting on university committees like an admissions committee, working for professional organizations like T and I do for CSEB. Some people, they get a PhD and they go into the academic side of things, but they don't become faculty members. They work as research associates, coordinators, or analysts. And in fact, a lot of international medical graduates wind up doing these kind of jobs. Next slide. So postdoctoral fellowships, they are really only useful if you want to work as a faculty member. They're seen as a bridge between a PhD and working on faculty. Generally, you'll be working for one faculty member who has lots of funding and lots of projects. But if that person is a very supportive postdoctoral supervisor, they'll treat you as an equal. They'll give you a chance to work on some of your own research, perhaps to help you put one of your own grants together. They may give you teaching opportunities because teaching experience is a must even for most entry-level faculty positions. Postdocs can be a good opportunity to help you network and kickstart your career. They typically last for 1 to 2 years. The big problem with postdoc fellowships is that academic positions can be hard to secure. So when people can't find an academic position after their postdoc, sometimes they might extend their postdoc or jump to another postdoc. And so you see this whole class of people who have done 3 to 4 postdocs and they haven't been able to secure an academic job. And you want to avoid being a serial postdoc. First of all, postdoc salaries are not bad, but you can get paid a whole lot more doing the same work in industry, in government, or as even an assistant professor. So avoid being a serial postdoc because you'll ghettoize yourself. And sadly, there are some faculty who take advantage of serial postdocs to underpay them and give them lots of work to do. So that's a bit of an overview of the types of jobs you'll get in academia. And if you're going into grad school or you want to go from master's to PhD, some of the things to think about when you're applying for grad school, because without grad school, your chances of having a career in epi and biostats are very, very slim. And so T's going to talk about careers in the public sector.
Great. Right. Thanks, Mark, for that. So I'm just conscious of time. It's about 12:54 on my watch. Likely we'll be going over time, so I hope that's okay with everyone. I'm thinking we'll go over maybe about 15 minutes. And again, if you have to go off early, you'll have access to the recording in 48 hours. So I'm going to give you sort of an overview of sort of the public sector, private sector, non-for-profit, as well as industry, just to give you an idea of other places that you could work in outside of academia. And I think for many of you, you've heard already that, again, many times that Mark has mentioned, it's highly competitive, right? So more and more people are graduating with these degrees, also master's degrees. They're going to have to compete for these jobs that we know are limited in an economy that, you know, with the labor market, it's been pretty grim lately. But there are places, if you're creative and you know where to look, certainly there are other options to you. So the public sector has been a place where I would say most epidemiologists and biostatisticians will go to work if they decide or they're unsuccessful in obtaining a job in academia. Now, because I'm in Ottawa, of course, I have a lot of colleagues who work for the federal government. In the federal government, the departments that mostly hire epidemiologists include Public Health Agency of Canada and Health Canada. But you'll see epidemiologists also employed in national defense. It's a very interesting sort of development that we've been seeing lately. You may also see some actually epidemiologists in Statistics Canada, which I forgot to add to that list. Many of our CSCB board members and members work at Statistics Canada in sort of the health data analysis section. In terms of provincial government, they also employ quite a few epidemiologists and biostatisticians. You'll see them in, for example, the ministries or departments of health. They tend to deal with mostly healthcare system issues, from funding to health provider to very specific program areas. There's also public health. So if I were to use, again, Ontario as not again, but use Ontario as an example. Public Health Ontario hires a significant number of epidemiologists. So you'll want to look at the job postings that come out of Public Health Ontario. There's also Health Quality Ontario, which is an agency that is publicly funded but acts as sort of an arm's length agency. There's also, for example, Cancer Care Ontario and many other provinces and territories. They'll have their own agency that specifically looks at cancer. Such as the BC Cancer Agency, which is funded through public funds, the provincial funds, but which employs quite a few epidemiologists to do a lot of data analysis work. There's also regional health. So in certain provinces and territories, you'll have regional health. So in Ontario, again, the local health integration networks, which look at healthcare delivery and funding, mostly at hospitals, would hire maybe one or two analysts for the region. So, for example, in Ottawa, we have the Champlain Local Health Integration Network, which includes Ottawa and also surrounding areas. So that's another option in terms of looking for employment opportunities. And there's also public health, which includes public health units, for example. And in my background, I've worked in the federal government, at the federal government level, provincial and public health, and so I've seen sort of the full gamut of opportunities that epidemiologists can be employed. Usually in a public health unit, depending on how big it is. So, for example, when I was working at the Leeds, Lanark, and Grenville District Health Unit, and you think about such a small geography. I think the biggest town or city where I grew up in anyway was 22,000 people. So they employed one epidemiologist. But if you were to look at Ottawa or Toronto Public Health, they would have many more positions. I would say at least between maybe 5 to 15, depending on the region in which it serves. And for all these sort of levels of the public sector in which an epidemiologist can be employed, you need a minimum of a master's degree. And I think most people working in government or in the public sector have a master's degree. Certainly a PhD, you'll see PhDs here and there, but it's not the most prominent degree amongst those who are employed in the public sector. I already mentioned in terms of educational degree, if you are in Public Health Agency of Canada or Health Canada as a senior scientist, where you're actually doing research, experimental research in that almost it's sort of quasi-academic because you probably have an appointment or an adjunct faculty membership with an academic institution, you're going to have a PhD. And some of the higher levels of government, so there's a position called the Chief Science Officer at the Public Health Agency of Canada, which reports to the Chief Public Health Officer. That position requires a PhD. If you're overseeing the broader research program of the agency, you definitely need to have a PhD there. But that's, again, one position out of many degrees within the public sector. I would suggest if you're looking at a public sector job, you'll get a leg up if you have had an internship or a practicum placement in a public sector, department. So for many degree programs, they'll offer or they'll recommend that you find a practicum in public health. It can be at all those different levels. So, for example, regional, public health, federal, provincial governments. Get that experience because they're more likely to hire you once you've completed your degree. And that sort of adds to your experience work. So even if it's unpaid, it counts for something. Of course, most often there's going to be greater weight to any experience in the public sector or also in the private sector for work that's conducted that is paid. In the federal government, there are a number of paid student work programs There's the Federal Student Work Experience Program, which actually I was part of for several years as I was completing my PhD, and that's a great program and it pays well. There's also the Field Epidemiology Program, which is a very competitive program for individuals who, for the most part, are interested or have experience in doing work in infectious diseases and outbreak investigation. It is very, very competitive, but you're pretty much guaranteed a job in the government once you complete that program. In terms of application process, they're usually through competitions unless you're going for a contract. Now, contracts are short term, they're not permanent. But if you're looking for a permanent position, full time in the public sector, you're going to have to go through some type of competition. So you want to highlight your skills and your previous work experience and make sure you address all the essential qualifications in that job posting. Just to give you some insight in terms of applying for a job in the public sector, especially federal government, they're going to look for those buzzwords. Any word that is in the job posting for the federal government, you need to mention those words in your application and show how you achieve or had that experience that shows that you have that essential qualification. That's super important. They're going to look at that first, and then they'll invite you for an interview if it works out. But if that's not addressed in your actual letter, then likely they'll throw that application out. And as Mark mentioned, just like in academia or going into a graduate school, you need to have good, strong references. And they're not going to be reference letters. They're going to be people who will be called up, and they're going to ask them questions about how you are as a student, as an employee. And they're going to ask very specific questions about not only your work experience, but how you work. Are you a team player? Do you work well with others? Are you responsible? So, you think that, I've met people of, all different walks of life. They may have 3 degrees, and then when you try to get them into a real work experience, they can't do a 9 to 5. And it seems so simple, and yet for so many, if that's not what they're used to, it can be a problem. So just at the minimum, have that work ethic, and oftentimes an employer is going to ask, do they have that work ethic? I've mentioned it before, being responsible, working in a team, super important. And I noticed in one of the questions someone asked about writing capacity, it's important to write well. If your application is rid of spelling errors, grammar issues, it's going to be really tough for the person who's evaluating that application to invite you for an interview. So make sure, again, as Mark was mentioning, get things proofread before you submit. In terms of non-for-profit sector, it's different from public. Oftentimes, these are sub-industry levels that are funded somehow through public funds, but are not considered public. So they're not government positions per se. And a lot of these organizations are healthcare delivery institutions, including hospitals or clinics and centers. Some health charities and societies and associations will hire an epidemiologist or a biostatistician. There aren't many, but some do. There are other health research institutes. So, for example, that may be attached to a hospital, for example, or they may be a standalone, but they may have funding from mostly public sector. So the research institutes, I've listed a few that do hire epidemiologists and biostatisticians. I would say CIHI is one of the top employers in terms of hiring an epidemiologist, even straight out of school. So I would take a look at the job postings on the Canadian Institutes of Health Information. Elizabeth Briere Research Institute is a place in Ottawa, that also hire EPIs and biostatisticians. There's also the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute. So I put examples where I've known people to be employed there. But certainly if you look at research institutes across the country, you should be able to find where some epidemiologists might be working. And again, don't look for a job posting that just says epidemiologist. Look at data analyst, health researcher, health policy analyst. Those are kinds of broader terms that you may see in job postings, and look at what the qualifications are. And if you have those qualifications, then apply for that job. I can speak to definitely think tanks. I work for one right now, and even though people think a think tank would be considered private industry, we're actually non-for-profit but private. So the difference is that you're not supposed to make you're not running a business to make profit. We're governed by a board of directors, but you operate more like a business compared to if you were in the public sector. So there are budgets. You need to make sure that you generate revenues to pay the back office. But think tank specifically, for the conference board anyway, for sure, is that our biz, main business is really about producing research, but to inform public policy, and there's an economic perspective as well. So other think tanks that would employ potentially an epidemiologist or biostatistician would also be the CD Howe, IRPP, Fraser Institute, the Center for Policy Alternatives. But you want to be careful when you're looking at think tanks, because sometimes they could be considered biased politically. So Conference Board and CD Howe and IRPP are considered centered from politically. Fraser Institute is oftentimes looked at as a right wing, and CCPA is more left. So if you don't want to attach yourself to a specific political ideology, then you want to make sure that you understand what those think tanks do and where they sit sort of on that political spectrum. At the conference board, even though we do hire epidemiologists, and I'm an epidemiologist and I now run the health economics group, we don't hire many epidemiologists. So I would say in any one health area within a think tank, you may hire 1 to 3 epidemiologists. So although it is an area that's really exciting and challenging, but and you get to do a lot of interesting topic areas, it's not a huge employer for someone who would have a degree in epi or biostats. In terms of qualifications, we would hire at the minimum someone with a master's degree, and certainly PhD level education is also quite nice. So if you see someone who's applying with a PhD, and they have a greater opportunity to sort of move up in the ranks, so in terms of taking up a leadership position on research later on. With that being said, and I'll just give you a little context, I know that you don't need a PhD to get a job, but what we're seeing lately is that we're getting a lot of applications from PhDs. So if we were to hire between a PhD and a master's, we'd more likely go with a PhD depending on their work experience, and their skill set and their salary expectations. So you've got to match your salary expectation with your degree level as well as your experience that you've gained in the past. What's really important, and then for us anyway, as a think tank or in general in the non-for-profit private sector, is having the ability to work in teams and strong communication skills. When we hire people, we make them write a writing test, and it gets evaluated by someone in our by actually one of our editors. So they'll evaluate the writing style, grammar, spelling, all those things, and the ability to analyze and critically analyze as well. So they get rated on a scale of 1 to 10, and if they get anything under a 6.5, then they aren't hired. That's sort of the way we work. People who work in this sector also are often called upon to do presentations. So oral communication skills are very important. You also have to have a business mindset, managing budgets, being able to work in a timely manner. Oftentimes our projects need to be completed within 2 to 4 months. So you don't have the luxury of time really to get things done quickly. That's probably why we don't do a lot of, experimental or even quasi-experimental studies. It's a lot of literature review or economic modeling that we do here. Again, strong references from your past employers. We don't often like to see references from professors. We want to see how you work in an employment environment. That's what we would stress when we're looking at references. And similar to the public sector, you should also look for internships in the non-for-profit and private sectors. We recently launched an internship program. Currently, we employ at the conference board 1 student from epidemiology from Ottawa U, 1 student from health sciences at Ottawa U, and 1 student from the PhD in population health. So I would always recommend that these the different programs in academia, if you want to support your students in enabling them to find work, it's good to have partnerships with organizations that are considering doing internships. And a lot of the places that do internships will be connected to a specific school. So we have an arrangement with McGill, for example, but because of my ties with Ottawa U, we open the internship program to Ottawa youth. So there's a role for business and public sector to create ties with academia, but there's also a role for academia to work with the public sector and private not-for-profit sector as well to create those opportunities for students. I'll just quickly talk about private industry. There are epidemiologists, biostatisticians who work for private industry. Mark mentioned that before, and he certainly has that past experience, whereas I have not. Although I have colleagues who work in pharmaceuticals, technology, and in consultancy. So Mark mentioned he did work for a consulting agency. Other agencies include, IMS Health, which is a growing and emerging organization employing many people from across the country as well as internationally, and they do hire quite a few epidemiologists. In terms of technology, medical devices, Medtronic, Janssen, which is an arm of Johnson & Johnson, hire epidemiologists as well as, I've mentioned all the pharmaceutical companies, which tend to, I think there are a few in Toronto, but many are in Montreal. So you also have to see about location, willingness to live in a certain area in order to work for that particular industry. Qualifications are similar to the not-for-profit sector. You see a lot of people with master's degree, many people with PhD level education. Previous experience is a must. Again, working in teams, strong communication, having that business mindset. And again, check for the internships. Make sure you have strong references from employers more so than from an academic professor. I think that is very important. If you're looking for a job, I would recommend a couple of links or a few links. On our CSCB website, we have a web page where we do post any career opportunities that come our way that we post. But there's also a generic job search link where we've listed a number of places that you can search for jobs from a specific organization. There's also even links, and I would recommend you look at the job placement companies such as Altus HR. For some reason, they've kept me on the list, and I get oftentimes job opportunities, contract opportunities in the federal government, and they come pretty often. So take a look at those links, see if there are any opportunities for you. Sometimes contract work is quite good. That's how you can gain your experience without committing to something long term. A lot of PhDs will do that type of work because they have more time as they're waiting for their data, or they want to supplement the doctoral work they're doing with some other experience. And another good website is the Epimonitor Job Bank. They have a lot of job postings there, and they're international. So you'll get Canada, but you'll also get US and other countries. And get yourself on lists. So ChiHi has a listserv where you can get on there, and they'll send you an email anytime a job posting comes up that's related to what you're interested in. The Ontario Public Health Bulletin is another good bulletin. Every Friday they produce something that gets sent out to your email, and they have job postings there. And of course, if you become a CSCB member, or if you're a CSCB member, we provide job listings and postings every month that gets sent to your email as well. And what we're doing moving forward is that there'll be additional job postings that won't necessarily be posted on the website. So there'll be specific extra job postings that will be on the e-bulletin that only members will get. So that's another motivation to become a member if you're not already one. Which brings me to sort of the final set of slides, which is really talking about the society as a whole. And I don't want to go into details on what we are, but certainly if we are to give you some insight in terms of what our plans and priorities are for the next few years, it really is around the mentorship, professional development side of things. I mentioned before that we're doing work on core competencies, which should help us define sort of, again, what kind of jobs an epidemiologist and a biostatistician should be ready to take on, and then also trying to develop those opportunities working with the different sectors. So we talked about academia, public, not-for-profit private sector in terms of engaging all these sectors in offering positions specifically for epidemiologists and biostatisticians, and how we can improve or increase the number of internship and practical opportunities for students in these fields of study. So I would encourage you, if you're not already, to become a CSB member. It's only $50 for a student. You get access to these webinars, and this is probably the first and only webinar that we're going to do that's free of charge to the public. But going forward with all our webinars, usually members will get, especially student members, would get access to our webinars for free, and or at a significantly reduced charge. We also have our annual student conference this year. It'll be in Manitoba, Winnipeg, Manitoba, and it's going to be in partnership with the Canadian Student Health Research Forum, which is co-sponsored by the Canadian Institutes for Health Research, or CIHR. So I encourage you to take a look at that event. CSB students get to attend this conference at a significantly reduced rate. Also, they have access to CSCB travel awards to attend, which we're limiting to student members as well. So with that being said, on this final slide, you can see our contact information, and we do encourage you to email us if you have any questions or concerns. And it leaves us with just a few minutes, and I think, again, we'll probably have to extend the time a bit to answer any questions. So as Mark, you were talking, I've been monitoring the questions, and what I think we should do, I think I'll read out the questions, and maybe I'll give you a chance, Mark, to answer them first, and then if I have anything to add, I'll add to that. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so the first question actually is from Sholay Raman, and that person has actually just left. But the question is, can I still have a successful career in epi if I am not good at writing?
It's going to be very difficult because a lot of epidemiology involves communicating research results. So you would certainly have to work on your writing. And if you're in university, most universities have student learning centers that can help you improve your writing. But yes, I would strongly encourage you to possess good writing skills.
And I would definitely support that. And as I was saying before, to work where I am, you actually do have to do a writing test. And you may have a career still as an epidemiologist, biostatistician, without being a good writer. But in terms of moving up the ranks, I think it's really important to have that skill. Certainly, it'll set you apart from the others. The second question is, many jobs require minimum 3 to 5 years experience. How do I go about finding, or where do I look for a job for someone with less than a year experience?
I think that you have to build on that year of experience and leverage that to sell yourself to potential employers. I'm not sure if this person has finished school yet, or if they're still in school. If they're still in school, using that experience and perhaps contacts that you've made with professors to get another job and to build upon that. If you have a degree and minimal experience, I know there are some companies in industry that do have training programs to hire people with little experience. Finding those programs requires a lot of legwork and a lot of research on the internet and through other job avenues. I found them, but you really have to look carefully.
Yeah, it takes a lot of, I think, dedication and patience to find those right opportunities. I would also say it's not about finding, so they'll say 3 to 5 years experience, but it might not be continuous. So for example, you don't need a job that'll be 3 to 5 years in that same job, or even like a 1-year job. So the way I was able to do it in order to get a job that required more experience was piecing those opportunities together. So for example, if you're an undergrad or even a master's student and you have summers off, likely you won't have a summer off with masters, but start accumulating your research experience early on. So don't take your summer and go off on vacation, but take that time to find, if you can, a research assistantship, either, paid or unpaid. Hopefully paid. I think we've been doing a bad job with the paid internships or opportunities, but certainly start early. In your master's, also, if you could do contracts here and there, but you also need to take a look at, is that going to compromise your ability to finish your degree? To give you a little personal context, I did quite a bit of contracts and I started working before I finished my PhD, and then it ended up taking double the time a PhD should take. So you're sacrificing getting that PhD done in a timely manner in order to get the work experience, so that when you're finished your degree, you have the work experience to apply for jobs. So it's that balance and trying to gauge what your priorities are. It's important, but but again, you have to be able to multitask, find those opportunities, what's aligned. The best situation is being able to do your master's or your PhD in a place of employment. So a lot of my colleagues, when they were doing their PhD, they actually did their PhD at their work. So they were paid as an employee of the federal government or public health to do a dissertation at work, which was their work project, which ended up being their degree as well as being their work experience. So that sort of is the best of both worlds if you have that opportunity. And it doesn't hurt to look for those at the start of your dissertation work if you can.
T, I have to leave in 5 or 6 minutes, but maybe
Sure.
I can give some, I've been looking at the other questions. Maybe I can give some quick responses.
Sure.
And if you want to follow up with some of those responses, then after I leave, you could do that?
Sure. Yes, please go ahead.
Because there are a few questions here that I can give some relatively rapid answers.
Mm-hmm.
And then, unfortunately, I've got office hours at 1:30 and my students have an assignment. So there'll be people outside my door. All right, so how can I get experience in EPI as an undergraduate student? Professors will not take me because I don't have experience. Who else can I ask? Well, you can always try to volunteer. That's certainly one option. Many professors take volunteers who have very little research experience because we realize people have to start somewhere. It's possible you haven't approached the right people, or you haven't approached them in the right way, so there's the volunteer experience. Doing an independent study project is another possibility. If your university has an EPI course, take that course and try and get to know the professor and approach them at some point to see if they have some work. Okay. What is better, 1 year or 2 year Masters of Epidemiology degree? It depends on the degree. 1 year is probably a non-thesis based, which is more for industry or government, and the 2 year is probably a master's with thesis, which is more appropriate for academia. How to make letter of intent stand out. Submitting it on pink paper would do the job, but what would make me a candidate that would stand out? Well, I think if you don't get too fancy submitting letters of intent on pink paper or in crayon or anything, that wouldn't help you. How to make the letter of intent stand out? I would review some of the points that I mentioned. At the start of your letter of intent, explain why you are applying to that specific program and how that specific program is going to help you reach your career objectives. So that should be the first 1 or 2 sentences. I'm applying to this program for XYZ reasons. This program will help me achieve my career objective of becoming a professor or director of a public health department, whatever the case may be. Then talk about your experience that's related to that department. So I gave the example of the HRM program at McMaster. It's a program to train researchers, so you want to highlight any previous research experience that you have, and then highlight the relevant courses, and hopefully you got good grades in those relevant courses. So it has to be a very practical letter of intent. As I said in the presentation, avoid storytelling, avoid doing anything that can make admissions committee people, not be warm to your application. So don't take huge political stances in letters of intent. Just be very practical. Are the B plus or A minus averages for entering grad school based on the overall GPA or solely for the last 2 years of study? Usually it's for the last year or the last 2 years of study at the undergraduate level. It depends on the university how far back they go, but we realize that often going to university is a tough adjustment when you come out of high school. So I would say 80% of the transcripts of students I've reviewed, and I've reviewed hundreds, their GPAs really climb as they progress into third and fourth year. So generally it's the last year or two that we look at. Have we ever thought of making a forum where people can ask questions? We had a listserv for CSEB members, but nobody was asking any questions. So since that time, we haven't revisited the idea of having a forum. Okay, one person lives in Montreal. They have a degree of public health from the American University of Beirut. They worked for a year in Ottawa. In Quebec, can you work with a degree from another country? You most certainly can. If you're in Montreal, there are a lot of opportunities through the Université de Montréal system and through the Ministry of Social Services in Quebec. A guy to contact in Montreal, he's a professor at McGill. His name is Gilles Paradis, and he's someone who can give you more insights into breaking into public health in the Montreal area. And I think that's it. Okay, there's a couple of more. I'm a new immigrant, recently finished my PhD, lots of experience in public health. What can we do for improving our chance to get our first job in Canada? A lot of foreign-trained students will look for jobs as research assistants in different professors' research units. So again, a lot of those jobs are word of mouth. Sometimes they're posted. You can always look to see who is doing work in your area of interest in your city and send them a tailored cover letter describing yourself and telling them what you're looking for. Sometimes that can work. Also check the job market in your local area. I finished my PhD outside of Canada. I used SPSS and Stata. Does CSEB have any facilities for us to learn R or SAS? We unfortunately don't have the facilities to actually provide people with training in R and SAS. R is a freeware program. You can download it for free off the internet, and you can basically teach it to yourself. SAS is a little more difficult because it's proprietary software, and by and large, the training courses cost money. But certainly R, because it's freeware, you can just download it and start practicing it yourself. There's a couple of questions about field epidemiology, which I'll leave T to answer. Does CSEB provide us with any facilities or support for project management professional certificate? Unfortunately not. CSEB doesn't have an educational component as part of its mandate. So I'll leave T. Another field epi question. Is there any course we can take to learn SAS or R? In universities, you can find courses that are offered in SAS or R. More typically, though, students who take statistics courses in university settings, they will learn these programs by themselves. You can find R tutorials online. They're not always very good, but they are there. And SAS, if you're a university student, SAS will give you access for free to various e-learning online SAS lectures that will help you teach the program. So that's if you're a university student. If you're not in university, again, R is free, but SAS, you would have to pay for the SAS courses.
Sorry, Mark, I should probably mention, though, that Mark Morial, who's our contact at SAS, we're working on a webinar series on SAS, which would be,
oh, that's fantastic.
but that's only free for CSCB members. So that's something that you want to take a look at if we offer it. It'll probably be at a cost, but not as expensive as if you were to do an in-course, in-class course with SAS.
Right. Does a PhD count as working experience? No, a PhD study would not. Postdoctoral fellowships, I would say they could, yes. Third-year undergrad at York, BSc in Kinesiology and Health Studies. The dream of this person is to become a biostatistician. How to volunteer work with professors. They are looking for more experience. I would like to gain experience. Yeah, it can certainly be tough to break the bubble, but you have to be tenacious. Again, go to these professors and offer yourself as a volunteer, and you may just luck out. Everywhere I've gotten in my career has been by pure chance and luck, and sometimes by meeting and asking the right people a question. But yeah, it's not easy. Right, free resources. Someone is pointing out that there are lots of free resources and you just have to look. I would agree. Is a GPA from undergraduate studies important when applying to jobs after a master's degree? Generally, no. I've never been asked to show an undergraduate transcript when I've gone to apply for a job. How much weight is given to grades when applying to grad school as a mature student who has had extensive paid experience? That's a very good question, because at McMaster we got many applicants who fit into this category. Sometimes that job experience is worth a lot more than grades, but for someone who's coming into a graduate program as a mature student, you're really going to have to make a clear argument to the admissions committee as to why you're applying to that graduate program and what's going to be the value added. So if you've been working for 10 years, you have to convince the admissions committee that going back to school is going to be beneficial to you. How is it going to be beneficial to you? And how is that program to which you're applying specifically going to be beneficial? Is STATA also commonly used? Not much in healthcare, but I do know some researchers use it. Primarily in Epi and Biostats, it's SAS and R. Graduate admissions depends on the university you want to attend. Yeah, you can look to get information on graduate schools from the website, but there is usually information that's not on the website that you would have value if you possessed. So it's always helpful to speak to people who are attending certain graduate schools or speak to professors to get the inside story, because what's on the internet is typically just the very formulaic general stuff, and if you have an inside track on a program, that's really going to help you when you're applying to that program. Is experience with SPSS necessary, or more generally SAS? Health Canada, Stats Canada, the US Food and Drug Administration, ICES, a lot of those agencies all use SAS. So you can do a thesis with SPSS. There's not a problem with it, and knowing it is certainly helpful. But in the job market, SAS is still the king. Okay, and someone says the Field Epi competition closes October 19th, and it happens only once every few years. So I've tried to give some quick answers given the time constraint. Some of these very, very good questions. T, I don't know, maybe you and I can think about doing fluid surveys so that people who have outstanding questions have a place to post them?
Sure, and actually, everyone will get an evaluation, so you can actually drop those questions into the comments section.
Right.
So we'll
So I
have
have
it
to
anyway.
go. I have to go, unfortunately. I have my office hours now, so for all of you who hung out for an hour and 35 minutes, thank you very much. I guess T might stay around for a few more minutes. Sorry I have to leave. These webinars are always of interest to students when we talk about careers and stuff like that. So I wish you all the best, and we will endeavor to answer any of your other questions offline.
Okay, well, thanks, Mark. So you all have my email and Mark's email and the general CSAB email. So feel free to ask any questions. If you even want to tweet at us, you can do so. And if you're going to tweet, actually, it'll actually go to the broader community because we'll retweet it. You may actually get more responses from a broader community, and that might be actually more helpful. So actually, I think Mark actually went through every single question, and then other colleagues, I think, who are participating in the webinar have also responded, especially when it comes to the Field Epi program. And I should have been very clear that, yes, the Field Epi program, you actually do have to have your master's degree already, as well as working experience in a public health, in the public health sector. So make sure you look very carefully at the program details before you apply. And I would also stress that SAS is really important to have in EPI. Um, if you have SAS, you'll be able to work with SPSS, but it might not be the same the other way around. So I understand anyway, SPSS is used in undergrad, oftentimes in health undergrad health programs, but try to get your SAS experience, and if not, you'll try to find a program, a master's program, a PhD program, in which you would be able to use SAS and learn using SAS. From what I understand, most EPI programs will use SAS, but if they don't, you need to be very careful and make sure that they offer it, or you get that experience some other way. And I think the only other question that I see, do we need to have bilingual competency for field epidemiologist program? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure if someone else on the call can talk about, or on the webinar can talk about bilingual competencies. But again, go on the website, take a look at the criteria for application, and they'll tell you exactly what the qualifications are for that. Another comment from Kimberly. I know some public health units and some federal divisions use STATA, so don't fret if you only know STATA. Again, STATA is it's a good program, and I think that if you know STATA, it should be easy for you actually to transition to SAS if you need to. So I also stress that Kimberly said, if you have STATA, don't worry about it. I think a lot of the programs that are teaching STATA are often in the out west. But again, if you need to transition from STATA to SAS, it'll be a relatively easy transition, I believe, but it's a little bit harder if you're going from SPSS to SAS. I think those are all the questions that have been posted right now, and we have to log off. So if you have any final questions, again, put them in the evaluation or send them to myself and or Mark. So thank you again for joining us. Sorry for going over time, and hopefully you'll be able to join us again for the next webinar once we finalize what that is. And again, I'd encourage you to become a member if you haven't already. Thanks very much. Goodbye.